Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of Machiavelli Talks, presented by the Machiavelli Center for Political and Strategic Studies, think tank of the Italian right. Welcome to our guest, live from Washington, D.C., Mr. Ali Maisam Nazary. Mr. Nazary, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on this program and giving me this opportunity.
Ali Nazary is the head of foreign relations for the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, an alliance of anti-Taliban fighters. Mr. Nazary, mainstream attention has quickly moved away from Afghanistan, at least in the Western countries, just a few weeks after the Taliban takeover of Kabul and the country. What is the current situation? Do the Taliban control the whole of the country, or are there territories still free of them? What is the situation on the ground?
The situation on the ground is much different than what is being portrayed in the mass media, especially in the media in the Western world. Right now, the country is in a state of anarchy. There is no government. No government succeeded the collapse of the previous state or government. There is no law and order in most of the country. The country is suffering a humanitarian crisis. There is an increase of terrorist groups throughout the country. You have internal fighting within the Taliban. And then you have the last bastion of democracy, of freedom, and the last remaining Western forces that are fighting international terrorism, which is the National Resistance Front, and we're based in the Panjshir Valley, in Panjshir Province, in Andarab District, and a few other places around that area. On September 6th, we allowed the Taliban to enter the main valley of Panjshir. We tactically withdrew to the side valleys, and so instead of a conventional war, we've been fighting a guerrilla war since September 6th, and this has helped us expand. And we control well over 60% of Panjshir at the moment. We have expanded to adjacent provinces and valleys. We are operating from 6 provinces now in the northeastern part of the country, and we are planning to expand very soon to elsewhere, and new pockets of resistance to be formed throughout the country. And our with the current situation on the ground, which is bleak and very dire, you have a rise of international terrorism, which is being completely ignored by Western media. You have occasional comments about the rise of Al Qaeda or ISIS-K, but there isn't much emphasis on it. What we're fighting today, what the National Resistance Front is fighting, is not a civil war. We don't characterize our fight as a civil war or resistance as a civil war, because we're not only fighting internal groups. We're continuing the global war on terror. The global war on terror that was started by us, by our NATO allies, by many other partners that we had. Everyone abandoned it, and we're all left all alone. We're left all alone by ourselves with limited amount of resources to continue this war on terror. And on the other side, you're seeing a plethora of terrorist groups. You're seeing an increase in their presence in the country. Just last week, General Mackenzie of Central Command said that Al Qaeda is increasing its presence. And we've been saying this for the past year, that the rank and file of Al Qaeda and their leadership has returned. You're seeing Al Qaeda in the northern borders, you're seeing them in the south, you're seeing them in the cities. Their leadership has returned. There are strong reports that their leader is in the country. And for example, the Taliban terrorists, they appointed an Al Qaeda member as the governor of Kabul province. So this is how intertwined the relationship between the Taliban and Al Qaeda is. Al Qaeda, the Taliban made promises in Doha for the past few years to Americans, to others, that we'll sever our ties with Al Qaeda. But now, after August 15th, they've actually strengthened their ties. They've welcomed Al Qaeda fighters, they've welcomed the Al Qaeda leadership back into Afghanistan. And so that's one side. The other is there is an increasing threat from ISIS-K. They're increasing their activities in the country. And as every day passes, they're able to recruit more people. They have an abundant amount of resources at their disposal, and they've been successful in promoting their platform and their ideology. And the people who are in control of Kabul, they're unable to control the situation. It's either they are incapable of controlling the situation, or they are unwilling to control it. Because there's one thing, when it comes to the Taliban, we've been characterizing them as a terrorist group. Their marriage with Al Qaeda is deep. It's very difficult for them to divorce Al Qaeda. Their relationship is intertwined. They share the same ideology with international terrorism, whatever group it is. Many people portray the Taliban as anti-ISIS, as an anti-ISIS group. That's not the case. They share the same ideology. They share the same end game, the same vision for the Islamic world and the globe as a whole. Both ISIS-K believe in an emirate, the Taliban believe in an emirate, and it's just that there is a power struggle between ISIS-K and these other terrorist groups, whether it's Al Qaeda or the Taliban. And on the other hand, the Taliban aren't a capable group made up of professionals, educated individuals, intellectuals, like other insurgencies that we've seen throughout human history, or contemporary history at least, where they've taken over a state and then created their own states on the ashes of the previous governments. The Taliban are unable to do that because they're all uneducated, they're illiterate, they are not statesmen, they're not state builders, they were not indoctrinated in Pakistan to become statesmen in the future. They were indoctrinated to act as a force of destruction. And this is what we're seeing today. That however much pressure there is from the international community, the Taliban are unable to manage the banking system, the economy, to build a functioning state with institutions to serve the masses, and they don't have the will and intention to do so. So the Taliban, for the past few months, every month or so, every few weeks or so, they've been having these events in Kabul, in central Kabul and downtown Kabul, gathering the families of suicide bombers and praising the suicide bombers in a city where these suicide bombers killed thousands, tens of thousands of civilians and others. So this just shows their disconnectedness with the masses, with the general population. When they praise the killers of all these civilians in Kabul in the past 20 years, it just shows that their intentions are not to serve the people. They're not acting based on the interests of the people. Another example is their so-called prime minister 2 weeks ago came on national TV and said, well, our duty and responsibility in the past 20 years was jihad. We launched our jihad. We were successful in it. We've defeated the infidels. We've defeated the corrupt government in Kabul. Now we have no duty and responsibility to the people. And so they say that it's God's duty to provide for the people. It's not our duty. This is coming from their so-called prime minister. It just shows the lack of competence And such a group controlling Kabul will never be able to alleviate or end the humanitarian crisis, to bring security throughout the country. Right now, crime is increasing. You see infighting amongst the Taliban themselves. There's at least 5 factions that are fighting over power, and because they lack the resources, they're going and exploiting from the general population. Human trafficking has increased. Drug trafficking has the drug cultivation, production, and trafficking has increased. Antiquity trafficking has increased. And so they are and they're acting like a crime syndicate. Their criminal activities have exponentially increased in the past few months, and these are all causes for us to be concerned. Um, and 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 this is why the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, led by Commander Ahmad Massoud, is determined to continue this resistance until we liberate the whole country, to revive democracy, and to ensure that everyone's rights are granted and freedom is granted to everyone, and that Afghanistan is once again an independent country.
So Taliban's are allied, you said, intertwined with Al Qaeda. This is not a big surprise because of their history. There is actually a struggle against ISIS, but that is not really a good news for us, because they are quite the same in your description, because they are all the same jihadist and Islamic extremist enemy of the West, obviously also of other Muslims, just as your organization is. Also, Guglielmo Picchi has joined us. Welcome, Guglielmo, live from Rome.
Yeah, hi
hello,
everyone.
Guillermo. It's great to see you.
Hi, Aline. It's my pleasure to see you again. I'm very sorry to all the people that are watching the program, but was caught in the middle of a station, so apologize for the connection and for the poor quality of the audio in background. I've heard with lots of attention what you said. In our last meeting in Washington, D.C., you explained that it was going to be a very interesting week in the United Nations regarding, if and when there was any recognition of the seat to the Taliban government or any other discussion on future aid. Would you be so kind to give us a wrap up on what happened in the United Nations, what is the current situation with the seat and with the freeze of assets and the other package of sanctions that are in place?
For sure. So the situation with, first of all, in general, recognition of the terrorist regime in Kabul is that after August 15th, more and more countries, whether in the region or elsewhere, they realized that the Taliban are not a unified force, and they cannot form a government that could represent the people. So we saw that more countries became hesitant to recognize them, and fortunately, this gave us more opportunity, and we also pushed for non-recognition, whether it was here in North America or in the European Union and elsewhere. And fortunately, the situation is that no country at the moment recognizes them as a government. They do not hold the vast majority of the embassies. They only have 1 or 2 embassies, and that's in the countries that are sponsoring them, that are supporting them. And the most important thing was preventing them from taking the UN seats. They invested heavily. They and their allies invested heavily so that they could acquire the UN seat and could represent Afghanistan at that stage. But fortunately, that was prevented. Their um, conspiracies were neutralized, and last week there was a decision that the Credentials Committee at the UN deferred the decision when it came to giving the seat and allowed the status quo to continue. So right now, as of now, they do not have any representation in the UN, and we are going to work as hard as possible to prevent them in any future meetings or scenarios from acquiring any type of representation at the United Nations, because this terrorist group is looking for legitimacy. They've been seeking legitimacy, political legitimacy, for the past 30 years. And not only in the past few months or few years or 20 years, but for the past 30 years. And because of their ideology, because of their objectives of not only launching jihad and destabilizing Afghanistan, but even transcending Afghanistan's borders and exporting their jihad and their fight in other countries, and them supporting other groups that have the same intention. So it is very, very crucial, very important for everyone, the whole international community, to be united and to prevent a terrorist group from receiving recognition and acting as if they're a normal government like any other state. We do not need another pariah state. We do not need another belligerent actor in the United Nations or anywhere else. So this is one part of our resistance, because both the most important part is the military struggle, the military efforts that we have inside Afghanistan. But on the political front, we are investing as much as well, since it has its importance and significance. And one of the most important efforts that we put in was preventing such recognition for this terrorist group.
And Mr. Nazary, how would you define your National Resistance Front? As a military alliance, as a political coalition, or something else? What are its objectives and leanings?
So the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, led by Commander Ahmad Massoud, is a grassroots movement. It comes from the people. It's not a coalition of political parties. It's not a coalition made up of political elite, because on August 15th, 2021, the political class that was in power for 20 years and the political parties all went into exile. Many of them went into exile even before August 15th. But pretty much everyone went to exile except for one individual who wasn't part of the political order of the past 20 years, who spent his time studying, receiving an education, studying his country's history and the unending conflict, and working amongst the people in whatever capacity it was. And that was Commander Ahmad Massoud. And he decided, instead of leaving the country, it was his responsibility to stay and to fight against the invaders, to fight against these terrorists. And so he went from Kabul directly to Panjshir. When he went to Panjshir, the local resistance fighters that he was preparing for at least 2 years, the local resistance fighters in other provinces came to Panjshir. And the remnants of Afghanistan's armed forces, the ANSF that was trained by the United States and other NATO countries, they started coming in too. The commandos, the police, the regular soldiers, and so you had the remnants of the ANSF and whatever unit and part of it they were. They came in they congregated behind him, and they pledged their allegiance to Commander Ahmad Massoud, saying that you are our only hope. And this is when the National Resistance Front was born. So it is a grassroots movement. It started within the population, amongst the people in the lowest levels of society, and this is how it's growing right now. It's a popular movement where day and day the masses are joining it, whether they were civilians or soldiers before August 15th. It is resonating amongst the people because our message is a clear message. We believe in freedom. We believe in independence. We believe that our country is occupied right now. Most of our country is occupied by another country. It's occupied by Pakistan, and there's direct Pakistani involvement. They're the ones pulling the strings. The Taliban and other groups, terrorist groups, are just puppets of Pakistan. So we believe our independence has been lost. We believe in justice, in the preservation of democracy, and equal rights for all citizens regarding race, religion, and gender. This is what we stand for, and that's what we're fighting for. When it comes to establishing justice, ending the conflict, and creating a new Afghanistan for everyone, for all ethnic groups. Because the one thing that I want to emphasize is Afghanistan is a country made up of ethnic minorities. It's a multicultural, multi-ethnic state. It's not a nation state. And in a country made up of minorities, where no one is a majority, no ethnic group constitutes a majority, it is very difficult to have a centralized state, a government that is highly centralized, which we've experienced in Afghanistan for decades now, and we could even say centuries, where power is concentrated in Kabul and in one individual. Beforehand, it was the king. In the past 50 years, it's been the president. And for us to end the conflict, because conflict in Afghanistan is a zero-sum game, when one individual receives power or grabs power, everyone else loses. They feel as if they're losers because it's not a win-win situation. It's a zero-sum game. It has one winner and the others are losers. In order to end the conflict over power, we need the right power sharing structure. We need a new social contract. We need a new political system which is decentralized, which is federalized. And we believe with such a political system, we could end Afghanistan's conflict. We could establish justice. We could ensure the rights of every citizen in the country, that every citizen feels a belonging to the state and feels responsibility, that they feel they're part of the power structure, that they feel they're part of the policy making and decision making process in the country. And so this is our vision for Afghanistan's future. This is what we're fighting for, resisting for. And we believe that this is the only viable solution to Afghanistan's unending conflict.
Well, of course, it's hard not to sympathize with your struggle against the Taliban and those extremists. But what do you expect, apart from liking? What do you expect from Western countries?
Well, we believe the Western world is still our partner, and we believe that we have common values and mutual enemies. And partnerships are based on common values and mutual enemies and mutual interests, which all three components can be seen between the National Resistance Front and Western countries. However, since August 15th, we've seen a lack of interest. We've seen the abandonment of Afghanistan, especially the last remaining democratic forces, the last remaining forces that are continuing the war on terror, that are continuing the fight against international terrorism. And so our expectation And our request is continued cooperation. Because what if the last remaining Western allies, they, God forbid, were annihilated, and in a year or two, the rise of terrorism is at such a level that it will directly threaten European soil and US soil. There won't be allies, natural allies on the ground to fight these terrorist groups, to defeat these terrorist groups. We were the natural allies in 2001, when after 9/11, when the war started. We were there, so we assisted, we helped the coalition remove the Taliban and other terrorists from power. The Kurds in 2014, when the US returned and other Western countries returned to fight ISIS, you had the Kurds as allies who helped the international community defeat ISIS. Now, if not, such an ally does not exist in Afghanistan, who's the international community going to rely on when such an effort is needed? The Taliban will never become enemies of terrorism because they're terrorists themselves. They share the same ideology. So expecting the Taliban to counter terrorism is an absurd idea. And we see many policymakers and decision makers in the West believe that, well, if we give enough aid to the Taliban might start counterterrorism measures. This is absurd. It didn't happen before August 15th. It will never happen after August 15th.
Well, I share your contempt for the Taliban, obviously, but I fear that many people in the West would object instead that their military already overthrew the Taliban once, 20 years ago, and for 20 years their forces have remained in the country fighting the Taliban, and their countries invested billions in the national rebuilding of Afghanistan. So I fear that many in the West would be unwilling to support a new involvement in your country. What would you reply to these people and their objections?
Well, we're not asking for troops on the ground. We believe the era of having troops on the ground is over, and even back in 2001, we didn't believe that having a surge, whether it was 2001 or 2009, a surge would be beneficial. What we're asking is other types of assistance, and just cutting off any type of assistance. That's not the solution as well. We believe there's other creative policies that could be adopted, that could ensure that Western allies inside the country are preserved and that they could resist. Right now, the Taliban and other terrorist groups, they're armed to the teeth. They have all the US-made gear, US-made weapons. So this is the absurdity. The irony is that we're facing an enemy, and we're facing international terrorists that are armed by Western weapons, Western equipment, and we have nothing. So you see an imbalance in this fight, and they're using everything that was given to Afghanistan. We believe that the terrorists will use all of these weapons against Westerners themselves, whether it's Western assets in the region or it's on European or US soil in the future. So it's very important not to abandon Afghanistan, ignore Afghanistan. Last time the Western world abandoned Afghanistan and just ignored it was in 1992. When the Cold War ended, Afghanistan was completely ignored for around a decade. And what did we see? We saw Afghanistan became a sanctuary of international terrorism. We saw that 9/11 and many other terrorist attacks were planned and initiated from Afghanistan. And this is what we will face in the future. If everyone just feels a fatigue and they say, well, let the people inside Afghanistan deal with their own country. No, it's everything is interconnected to today. This world that we live in today is so small. It's so interconnected that in one place on Earth, if something happens, if a threat grows, it'll start threatening everywhere else. So it's much better to address it now when it's small, when it's smaller in scale, and instead of it becoming a larger tumor, and then we are forced to go in and eradicate it.
Please, Guglielmo.
Ali, yes, you
Yes.
mentioned the equipment that the Taliban has gathered from the US, from the other Western allies who left the country. Would you give a military description of what is happening right now, not just in Bashir, but I mean, how active is the National Resistance Front, and what is, the reality on the battle line? Because the perception in the West is that, of course, there is sympathy to everyone resisting the Taliban, but some commentators said, well, I mean, they're too weak, so the National Resistance Front is maybe something heroic or even something nostalgic, but they cannot make any difference on the ground. Instead, I mean, for at least the few reports that we get, the situation is not as negative as some international commentators are doing. Would you give us an update on this and, further deepen on this topic, please?
So as I stated before, the military situation is bleak. So there's insecurity throughout the country. The country is in a state of anarchy. There is no rule of law. There is no law and order anywhere, whether it's in the cities or in the rural areas. And when it comes to the fighting, so there's one fighting happening between us, our resistance against the Taliban, and as I mentioned before, we are expanding. So we are operating in at least 6 provinces now, and it's guerrilla war. We cannot fight a conventional war right now because, as I stated before, the Taliban and terrorist groups are armed to the teeth. We have limited amount of resources. And the same in the cities. We are operating in the cities. We've been launching attacks in the cities. And on the other hand, you have a weaker Taliban. You have infighting amongst the Taliban. Their factional fighting is increasing. There's a competition over leadership. So you're seeing more a deeper rift between the different factions of the Taliban. So they're much weaker than they were back in August 15th, and this is going to increase as we move on. Two, what makes us stronger than the Taliban isn't the military imbalance that exists between us. The military imbalance existed back in the 1980s when we were fighting the Soviets. The Soviets and the communist regime in Kabul, they had better capabilities than what the Taliban have today. They had an air force, they had artillery, they had tanks, they had everything in their possession. But we defeated them. With that military imbalance, the Soviets in Panjshir invaded Panjshir 9 times, and we defeated them all 9 times when they came into Panjshir. So this isn't something new to us. We have the experience, and there is a precedent of us facing a stronger enemy and us winning and overcoming that. What matters in Afghanistan is legitimacy. The side that always wins the conflict is the side that enjoys legitimacy. We do not believe this conflict has ended. It didn't end on August 15th. The Taliban do not enjoy legitimacy. They don't enjoy the support of the general population, but we do. Because our message is based on the people's interests. This is what the people want. And we've seen this, that wherever we go, the people welcome us. And we've been getting more recruits both in rural Afghanistan and in the cities. And this is why the National Resistance Front is growing. It doesn't matter how strong the Taliban are or how weak we are militarily. It's how much political legitimacy one of the sides of the conflict has, and the one that enjoys more legitimacy, they'll prevail and they'll become victorious. And militarily, we are launching ambushes, we are launching raids and different operations. So on the military side, we are successful as well, because the Taliban are trapped in the cities, they're trapped in the villages. For years, for 2 decades, they were in the mountains. Now they aren't. They're out in the open, so they are an open target. So it's very easy for us to target them and to be successful in that.
Thank you. You mentioned that Afghanistan, I mean, is made by a number of ethnic minorities, and that a centralized state is something difficult to build. One critic that you can read in the international press is that the National Resistance Front is mainly Panjshir and Tajik ethnic people of Afghanistan. So it cannot be a movement that represents, everyone in Afghanistan. How would you address this critic, and how, I mean, is the attempt not just to represent Panjshir and the Tajik ethnicity, but to be able to expand across all the other minorities that are within Afghanistan?
So when it comes to the makeup of the National Resistance Front, we have people in both our political and military structure that represent all ethnic groups. We have Hazaras, we have Uzbeks, we have Pashtuns, we have Tajiks. So it is representative of all of Afghanistan's ethnic groups, and amongst our commanders as well, or the remnants of the ANSF. They're from different ethnic groups. They're from the Hazara community, Pashtun community, and the Tajiks, Uzbeks, and so forth. But what matters aren't individuals, how many individuals from what ethnic group you have. What matters is our message, is our platform, is our narrative. And this is a message, and this is an objective, a vision that we have for every single citizen of the country, regardless of their ethnic group, regardless if they're a man or a woman, regardless of their religion or sect. Our message is for everyone that we want to ensure that their freedom will not be taken from them in the future, that everyone enjoys all their freedom and their rights as human beings, as citizens, equal citizens under the law. And for us, the best political system, political structure, that every single citizen, every single ethnic group could live in harmony, that could coexist peacefully, and could enjoy equal rights, is a decentralized system, is a federal system. We do not see any other solution that could be acceptable to all ethnic groups. This isn't the demand of only Tajiks or a specific region in Afghanistan. This is the demand of the general population. They're tired of one individual or a group of corrupt political elites in Kabul deciding what happens for the whole country. We should devolve power to the people, that we should give power, distribute power amongst the people. People at the village level, at the district level, at the provincial level. They should be the decision makers. They should be the ones deciding what happens in their country. And they will see themselves in power. They will see themselves in the government. They will see themselves deciding their fate and future. And that society and the state will be connected with one another. This could end the conflict. One of the reasons why we've had perpetual conflict in Afghanistan is that the people believe that there is a distance between them and the state. They don't see themselves in the state, in the government, from whichever ethnicity they are from. And so one of the ways of ending the conflict and for people to enjoy power and to decide their own fate and future is this system, and it's for everyone. Our message is not limited to one ethnic group or one community. It's for everyone in the country.
Thank you, Ali. One final question. There is a big debate in the US and the European Union right now on humanitarian aid, which reading newspapers and informed people are we're discussing of millions and millions of US dollars. What would be your approach and the National Resistance Front approach in terms of this aid? Should this aid come in, humanitarian aid? In what form, to whom should be delivered, who should administer it? Elaborate, please, on this specific topic. Thank you.
So right now, there is a huge humanitarian crisis that Afghanistan is facing. It's unprecedented. We've never faced such a humanitarian crisis ever in our country to this extent. What we believe is that the right mechanism should be adopted for aid to go to everyone. Unfortunately, right now, we're seeing a lot of aid going into Afghanistan, but it's not being distributed to everyone. First, a large percentage is taken by the Taliban, and then it's being distributed in areas that the Taliban have enjoyed support in the past 20 years. So there is a discrimination when it comes to the distribution of aid, humanitarian aid. So there's many regions that are deprived from humanitarian aid, whatever amount that is coming in. So there has to be a better mechanism to oversee the distribution of aid, so it goes to every community, it goes throughout the country, not specific. So it could be prevented from discrimination, especially by the Taliban, because at the moment, in the past month or so, whatever aid that is coming, we see a large percentage going in one region and a very small percentage going to the other regions, especially regions that the Taliban have not enjoyed support in the past 20 years. And so there is these problems when it comes to the humanitarian aid. And like I stated before, the Taliban are not statesmen. They themselves cannot manage anything, whether it's the banking system, economy, administrative affairs, whatever that a statesman has to conduct. And one thing would be they're unable to manage distribution of humanitarian aid and ending the humanitarian crisis. So this is something that the international community has to do directly, and without intervention and without a better mechanism in place. The humanitarian crisis, with whatever amount of humanitarian aid that is going in from the European Union or from the US or from the UN, it won't make a difference.
So it's time to wrap up. We've learned that the fight in Afghanistan is far from over. That
Yes.
the West shouldn't overlook it. It's not a matter of putting again NATO boots on the ground, but of supporting someone else than the Taliban and their friends of Al Qaeda. So thank you a lot, Mr. Nazary, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Many thanks also to Guglielmo Picchi, to all our viewers. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and especially our website, centromachiavelli.com. Thanks for watching, and see you at the next episode.